The clattering of boots echoed through the barracks as the men of the 2nd Infantry Battalion prepared for their mission. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes just before a storm, when every soldier knows the battle is imminent but the waiting is unbearable. They all wore the same expression. Focused, determined, ready for action, except for Sergeant Amelia Hayes, who stood apart from the group, eyes lowered, carefully wiping down the barrel of a rifle. A rifle, the very thing that, for everyone else, symbolized their purpose, their weapon in the war. For Amelia, it was just another task to check off on the never-ending list of things to do before they deployed. The rest of the soldiers, however, didn't see it that way. They saw her. "You've been cleaning that thing for hours, Ames?" Sergeant Mitch Carleton sneered, leaning against a nearby wall, his arms crossed over his chest. His voice was thick with mockery. "Is that your big contribution to the mission today? Make sure that rifle's sparkly clean." "Huh." The others laughed, a chorus of cruel chuckles that echoed off the concrete walls. Amelia didn't react. She just kept wiping, methodically, as though their words didn't reach her. But they did. Every single one of them did. "I swear, if I get ambushed out there and that rifle jams, I'm blaming you," Private Alex Torres added, his voice loud and obnoxious. "I'll be praying you did more than polish it." Amelia didn't look up. She focused on the rifle in her hands, the smooth, cold metal that felt like a lifeline. Each stroke of the cloth across its surface was a moment of escape, a brief sanctuary where the world's judgment couldn't touch her. She could feel their eyes on her, though, could hear the soft, hushed laughter as the men made their way to the gear rack, preparing their own weapons. "Maybe if you spent less time cleaning and more time actually training, you wouldn't be such a liability on the field," Corporal Reynolds spat, the sneer on his face sharp enough to cut through the air. "We need soldiers who can fight, not housekeepers in uniform." Amelia's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. The words weren't new. They were the same ones she had heard every day since she arrived in this unit. The same dismissive sneers and mocking comments. They didn't understand. She wasn't just cleaning rifles. She was learning them. She was understanding every internal mechanism, every tiny nuance of how they operated. She could strip one down and put it back together blindfolded, but none of them cared to see that. "All right, enough of this." Captain Raymond Haskell's voice cut through the conversation, rough and commanding. The entire squad fell silent as he walked into the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from granite. His eyes flicked briefly over the group, a quick scan of his soldiers. He had a way of making everyone feel like they were being measured, and he was never impressed. Amelia stood up straight at his presence, but she kept her gaze fixed on the rifle, trying to ignore the weight of his eyes. "Hayes," Captain Haskell's voice was cold, his eyes narrowing as he stared at her. "You're still here cleaning weapons? The rest of us are gearing up for battle. Do you think it's going to help if your rifle's spotless while the rest of us get our asses shot off?" The words stung like a slap, but Amelia didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on the barrel she was polishing, her grip tightening around the cloth. It was all she could do to keep from shaking. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in front of these men was a weakness. They would only see it as confirmation that they were right, that she didn't belong. "I'm doing my job, sir," she replied, her voice steady, controlled. Her fingers continued their work, each stroke of the cloth a small act of defiance. "Oh, I see." Captain Haskell's lips curled into a smirk. "Doing your job. You're a real asset, aren't you?" He laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed through the room. "You know, Hayes, you're the kind of soldier we don't need. The kind who hides behind a cleaning rag while the real work's going on." He turned to the rest of the squad, shaking his head. "This is why we're losing the war, people. We've got soldiers more concerned with their gear than their guts." The men snickered, some exchanging amused glances, others rolling their eyes. Amelia's hands tightened around the rifle, but she didn't look up. She couldn't. If she did, they would see the fire burning in her eyes, a fire that they would never understand. Instead, she focused on the feel of the rifle, the subtle imperfections of the metal, the familiar weight of it in her hands. "You're dismissed, Sergeant," Captain Haskell said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Get yourself ready. You're not a cleaning lady. We've got a real fight ahead of us." As the others filed out of the room, leaving her alone with the rifle, Amelia exhaled, the breath shaky but controlled. The laughter echoed in her ears, and for a brief moment, she felt like the smallest person in the world. Invisible, insignificant. She was just the woman who cleaned rifles, after all. What else could she be? But then she heard it, the sound of the door closing behind her. She looked up, catching her reflection in the polished surface of the barrel, her face ghostly pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Her eyes narrowed. She wasn't just the woman who cleaned rifles. She was the woman who knew them better than anyone in this room. And someday they would learn the hard way. Taking one last look at the weapon, she stood and strapped it across her chest. Without a word, she walked out of the room, her steps firm, her back straight. They didn't know it yet, but she was about to show them all exactly what she was made of. The battlefield was chaos. The air was thick with smoke, the crack of gunfire sharp enough to rattle the bones. Amelia's feet pounded across the dirt as she kept pace with the rest of her squad, the mission unfolding with terrifying speed. They were moving fast, too fast for anyone to truly assess the situation, their hearts pounding with adrenaline as they approached the enemy encampment. But Amelia wasn't just running. She was calculating. With every step, her mind processed the mechanics of the environment, the angle of the sun, the sound of the wind, the echo of distant gunfire. It was an art to her. She'd spent so many hours cleaning rifles, stripping them down to their bare parts, understanding the intricate dance of metal and motion. In the chaos of battle, that knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. Still, as the squad advanced toward the enemy's fortified position, the mocking voices from earlier rang in her ears. "Just the cleaner. Housekeeper in uniform. She'll be useless on the field." The laughter was like a weight in her chest. The men didn't see her, didn't understand her, didn't even know the real reason she was here. The ridicule of yesterday's barracks still hung over her like a cloud. But today, on this mission, she was going to show them. Amelia stayed at the back of the squad, her rifle gripped tightly in her hands, her knuckles white. She was still the quiet one, the one they looked over, the one they didn't think twice about, the one they still saw as a glorified janitor, who only knew how to clean and maintain weapons. "All right, Hayes," Captain Haskell barked as they reached the edge of the enemy encampment. "Take point. We need eyes on the target. And for God's sake, try not to screw this up." His voice was clipped, dismissive, as if giving her this task was a punishment rather than an opportunity. Amelia's heart slammed in her chest, but her face remained neutral. She nodded silently and moved forward, crouching low in the dirt. The others followed behind her, moving with a practiced ease, as if they were all part of the same machine. But Amelia was aware of every piece of the puzzle, the terrain, the cover, the way the enemy might react to their presence. She had spent hours cleaning her rifle, yes, but she had also spent hours studying it. Every soldier needed to know their weapon like a second skin. It was the one thing she had, the one thing she could master. "Keep your head down, Hayes," Sergeant Carlton muttered from behind her, still not seeing her for what she truly was. "You might be able to clean rifles, but I doubt you can shoot worth a damn." His voice was low, but the sarcasm still laced his words. He couldn't resist. He never could. Amelia bit back the urge to snap. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was here to survive. But every barb, every condescending comment, grated on her nerves like sandpaper. They reached the perimeter of the enemy camp. Amelia motioned for the team to stop, her senses straining to detect any movement in the distance. She scanned the area with precision, her sharp eyes picking out the faint outlines of enemy patrols, the smallest hints of movement beyond the camp's walls. Her mind worked like a machine, processing the details in a split second. "There's a blind spot to the east," Amelia whispered, pointing. "If we move through there, we'll be able to get closer without being seen." Captain Haskell turned his head to her, his expression unreadable. You sure about that? Amelia didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. She led the team, moving swiftly and silently, her heart pounding not from fear, but from the sheer clarity of purpose that came when she knew she was in her element. She was in control, her mind and body working as one. Her rifle, polished to a gleaming perfection, felt like an extension of her arm. She had cleaned and calibrated it countless times. It was hers in a way no one could ever understand. But as they neared the enemy's stronghold, disaster struck. A squad of enemy soldiers appeared out of nowhere, cutting off their retreat route. Gunfire erupted in all directions, and the world became a blur of movement and noise. The squad dove for cover, the sound of bullets slicing through the air around them. Captain Haskell's voice was muffled by the chaos, but it was clear they were outnumbered, pinned down. Hayes! Haskell's voice broke through the noise, sharp and commanding. Take them out! Amelia's pulse raced. She didn't hesitate. She dropped to one knee, her rifle raised to her shoulder. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but her hands were steady. The mockery of the men behind her, the doubt in their eyes, it all disappeared in an instant. She wasn't here for them. She was here for the mission. She aimed, took a deep breath, and fired. The first shot echoed across the field, striking an enemy soldier in the chest. It was precise, clean, just as she had practiced so many times before. She adjusted her position, firing again, hitting another target. The sound of the rifle was a steady rhythm, each shot landing with deadly accuracy. The men behind her had stopped shouting, their eyes wide as they watched the once-dismissed rifle cleaner dismantle the enemy forces with ease. Amelia wasn't just good. She was lethal, the kind of soldier you didn't underestimate. She was calm, calculating, and deadly. Holy shit! Private Torres muttered under his breath. She's actually good. Amelia didn't hear him. She was already moving again, eyes scanning, rifle ready. The enemy was retreating, but she wasn't going to let them get away. She fired again, taking down the last of the attackers. The field fell silent, save for the distant sound of gunfire. The squad was safe, but they weren't unscathed. Haskell was injured, a bullet grazing his shoulder. Sergeant Carlton's arm was bleeding, but both men were still alive. Could have been much worse. Should have been much worse. Amelia lowered her rifle and turned to face the team. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but her face was unreadable. She had done her job. She had saved them. But Haskell's eyes weren't filled with gratitude, not yet. He was still processing the reality of what had just happened. He had seen it, though. Seen what she was capable of. Good job, Hayes, he said, his voice quieter now, but still laced with disbelief. But don't think I'm going to start handing out medals. You've got a lot more to prove. It wasn't a compliment, but it wasn't the ridicule it had been earlier either. Amelia didn't care. She just nodded, lowering her rifle to the ground. She had proven something to herself if no one else. She was a weapon in ways they still couldn't understand. And they would learn. The battle had escalated. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the war-torn landscape. The air was thick with the acrid stench of smoke and sweat, the once pristine uniforms of the squad now muddied and torn. The sound of distant gunfire had transformed into a constant, relentless din, the clash of war, up close and brutal. Amelia's mind was in overdrive, her senses heightened. Every decision, every action mattered now. The mission was no longer about proving herself. It was about survival. They were deeper in enemy territory than anyone had anticipated, and the squad was running low on ammunition. Worse, their communication system had failed. They had no way of calling for backup or requesting extraction. They were alone, surrounded by a fortified enemy that knew every inch of the land. Keep moving! Captain Haskell's voice barked as he led the charge, though his confidence seemed to waver. The squad was beginning to look more like a ragtag group of survivors than a well-oiled machine. The men, once brimming with bravado, now moved with the weary gait of soldiers who understood they were on the brink of defeat. Amelia, though, was still sharp. Her rifle, though well-used and slightly battered, was as reliable as ever. She had memorized every inch of it, every click, every turn of the bolt. It was the tool of her trade, her partner in this war. But it wasn't enough. They were too exposed. They had made a mistake by advancing into the open fields without proper cover. The enemy's snipers had picked them off one by one, forcing the squad to retreat behind the flimsy barricades of broken equipment and dirt mounds. Captain Haskell's wound from earlier had slowed him down, and now Sergeant Carlton was limping, his leg injured by shrapnel. "We're sitting ducks out here," Sergeant Carlton muttered through gritted teeth, his face drawn and pale from the pain. "We need a plan, and fast." The urgency in his voice was palpable, but no one had the answers. The plan had gone awry. They were cornered. "Hayes." Captain Haskell's voice was harsh, almost desperate. His eyes locked onto her with a mix of disbelief and frustration. "You're the one who knows these damn rifles better than anyone. Get us out of this mess. Fix the radio. Anything. Now." The words stung, but Amelia didn't flinch. She didn't have time to. She could feel her pulse quicken, but her hands remained steady. She had been waiting for this moment, even if she hadn't known it until now. This was what she was trained for, not to clean rifles, not to be the housekeeper in uniform, but to keep them alive. She dropped to one knee beside the damaged radio, her fingers moving with practiced precision. It was a simple malfunction, one that many soldiers would miss in the heat of battle, but not her. She knew the intricacies of each piece of equipment. She knew how to listen for the subtle hums and clicks that most others ignored. "Give me a second," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. She could hear them behind her, the murmurs of the men who had once mocked her. They were watching now, waiting. She didn't need their approval. She just needed this to work. The radio sparked and sputtered as she connected the wires, rerouted the power, and adjusted the frequencies. Her mind was entirely focused, blocking out the sounds of gunfire and shouting. All that existed was the task before her. The men were relying on her. "Come on," she whispered under her breath as she twisted a dial. A sharp, crackling noise filled the air. And then, just as she had hoped, a voice came through, distant, but clear enough. "This is Bravo Team. We copy. What's your status?" Amelia didn't hesitate. She relayed their coordinates, their status, the number of enemy combatants in the area. The transmission was short and to the point, but it was enough. Help was on the way. They just had to hold out a little longer. As she finished the transmission, she turned back to face the team. Captain Haskell had been watching her, his face a mask of unreadable emotion. "You did it," he said, his voice low, almost surprised. Amelia simply nodded. "They'll be here soon," she said, then stood up and grabbed her rifle. "But we're not out of this yet." It was then that the reality of their situation truly set in. The enemy wasn't going to wait. They were still closing in, and the squad had no cover left. They were going to have to fight their way out, or they wouldn't make it. "We need to advance," Captain Haskell said, his voice growing more firm. "Hayes, you're with me. We're going to take out the enemy's forward position." Amelia didn't argue. She knew the risk. She knew that moving out of cover in their current state was borderline suicidal. But she also knew that this was their only shot at survival. They had to act before the enemy had them completely surrounded. "Let's move," she said, and they sprang into action. The rest of the squad followed, their movement quick but deliberate. Amelia was at the front now, leading the way. She moved with an almost mechanical precision, calculating every step, every shot, every second. Her rifle was an extension of herself, and she wasn't just firing at targets. She was thinking, adapting, reading the enemy's every move. The first soldier she took down was swift. A clean shot, one that left the enemy with no chance to retaliate. The next came just as fast, another sniper whose position was now compromised. Amelia moved without hesitation, her instincts taking over. The others were close behind, but it was clear now that the men had shifted. They were no longer laughing. They were no longer mocking her. They were following her, listening to her every command, trusting her with their lives. "Move up," Amelia shouted as she fired another round, clearing the way. The squad advanced with newfound purpose, following her lead. They were a team now, no longer divided by doubt or arrogance. The mission was bigger than any of them, and Amelia was the one guiding them toward victory. With every step, she felt a sense of power rising in her chest. She wasn't just cleaning rifles. She wasn't just proving a point. She was saving their lives. They were no longer just the soldiers who mocked her. They were the soldiers who saw her for who she truly was, a weapon of unparalleled precision, a force to be reckoned with. And they were going to make it out of here because of her. The roar of enemy gunfire filled the air as the squad pushed deeper into the heart of the enemy encampment. The night had fallen fully, and the shadows of trees and crumbling buildings blended into one suffocating mass. Every step felt like it was taking them closer to the edge of a precipice. The world had shrunk to the sharp, focused thrum of their heartbeats and the echo of boots on dirt. Amelia's mind was calm, her senses razor-sharp, but her heart was still pounding with adrenaline. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. It wasn't about cleaning rifles anymore. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about survival, not just for herself, but for the men who had finally stopped underestimating her. She had shown them what she was capable of, but now, she needed to show them how much she could do when pushed to the edge. They had made it this far, but the danger was growing by the minute. The enemy's fortifications loomed in the distance, a wall of concrete and steel, and the squad was exposed in open ground. Behind them there was no retreat, only forward. Their options were running out. The radio had given them a glimmer of hope, but it would take hours for backup to arrive. Amelia knew that they couldn't afford to wait. The enemy's numbers were too great, and their firepower too overwhelming. She heard Captain Haskell's voice in her ear, his words strained, but the command still clear. "Hayes, we can't stay here. We need to push through to that breach in their defenses, but we're sitting ducks out here. You know these rifles better than anyone. Give us a way in." Amelia's fingers tightened on her rifle. She didn't need to think twice. She had been tracking the enemy's positions from the moment they had entered the kill zone. She knew their weak spots. She knew the gaps in their defense. And she knew that this was their one shot at taking the enemy by surprise. Without a word, she motioned for the squad to follow her. She led them through the wreckage of a half-burnt building, weaving between the ruins with practiced ease. The sounds of the firefight had become a low hum in her ears. It was all just background noise now. The chaos of battle, the screams of her squad, the flashes of gunfire lighting up the darkness. It was all part of the same symphony of war. Her only focus was the mission, the next step, the next move. They reached the breach in the enemy's perimeter, a narrow gap between two concrete barriers, just big enough for them to squeeze through. The enemy snipers were positioned on higher ground, their vantage points nearly perfect for cutting down anyone who tried to advance. Amelia didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees, her rifle raised, her aim as steady as a surgeon's scalpel. The men behind her held their breath. A flash of movement caught her eye, and without a moment's hesitation, she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out in the night, and an enemy soldier dropped from the tower. He had never seen it coming. "Move!" Amelia shouted as she sprang to her feet, motioning for the squad to advance. The men scrambled forward, charging into the breach. But Amelia wasn't done. She wasn't finished. There was more to do, more to eliminate. She moved with deadly precision, guiding the team through the gap while her rifle cracked with a steady rhythm. Every shot was calculated, every target neutralized with minimal effort. It was as if she had become one with the weapon. Each squeeze of the trigger felt instinctive. The rifle wasn't just an extension of her body anymore. It was an extension of her mind, her will. Captain Haskell, now fully recovered from his earlier injury, was close behind. He had seen it, seen her transformation from the woman they all mocked to the soldier they relied on. But even now, as the enemy forces began to thin out, he was still processing the magnitude of her actions. He had always thought that he was the one who led the squad, the one who called the shots. But now he realized how wrong he had been. Amelia had led them here, She had led them into the heart of the enemy's defenses, and now she was going to finish it. "Cover me," Haskell shouted, as he darted forward with two of the other soldiers, making his way toward the next position. Amelia didn't hesitate. She dropped to one knee, her rifle steady, her eyes locked on their enemies. She could hear the thudding of her heartbeat in her ears, but her hands never wavered. The next sniper was in position, taking shots at Haskell's team. He didn't know it yet, but Amelia was already targeting him. Another shot rang out, and the sniper crumpled to the ground, never seeing her coming. "Clear!" she called out, her voice unwavering. Captain Haskell gave her a brief, appreciative glance as he turned to lead the charge again. Amelia's heart raced as the squad pushed forward, each step taking them deeper into the enemy's stronghold. They were nearly there, nearly at the heart of the enemy's command center. But then, from the corner of her eye, Amelia saw something she hadn't anticipated. A group of enemy soldiers, fresh reinforcements, moving toward their position from the east. They were too close, and there was no cover left. Amelia's mind raced. There was no time for a strategic retreat. There was no time for anything but action. Without thinking, she moved into the open, her rifle raised, her body a shield for the squad behind her. She fired rapidly, the bullets striking down one enemy after another. But she wasn't just shooting. She was calculating the angles, adjusting her aim, anticipating where the enemy would move next. She was moving faster than they could react, faster than they could even process the threat. The first two soldiers fell, and then a third. The squad pushed forward, but the enemy was still coming. She couldn't let them reach the others. Amelia's breath was coming fast now. Sweat dripped down her face, but her hands were steady. She was in the zone in a way she had never been before. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about saving them all. She fired one last time, taking down the last of the reinforcements as they tried to flank the squad. Her rifle clicked empty, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. The squad stood still, catching their breath, scanning for any remaining threats. The battle had taken everything from them, but it had also shown them who Amelia truly was. A force of nature, calm in the storm, a soldier who was far more than they had ever imagined. Captain Haskell, covered in dirt and blood, turned to her. His face hard but his eyes filled with something resembling respect. "You did it," he said, his voice rough, but this time it wasn't dismissive. "We wouldn't have made it without you." Amelia's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no mockery in his gaze. There was nothing but recognition. She didn't smile, didn't even nod. She just wiped the sweat from her brow, slung her rifle over her shoulder, and turned toward the squad's next objective. She had done her part, and now she was finally starting to get the respect she had earned. The battle had ended. The sound of gunfire, the roar of explosions, the chaotic shouting. It had all faded into the eerie silence that followed a brutal confrontation. The squad stood in the aftermath, surrounded by the twisted remains of the enemy stronghold, the dust settling around them like a shroud. The night air felt colder now, the adrenaline of battle still clinging to their bodies like a second skin. But despite the exhaustion, despite the wounds that now adorned them, there was a sense of relief and something more, something powerful quietly building in the air. Amelia stood at the edge of the perimeter, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her face streaked with dirt and blood. Her body was sore, aching from the fight, but there was a strange calm within her. She had led them, she had fought for them, and she had brought them out of hell. The mission was a success, and the enemy was decimated. But it wasn't just about the mission anymore. She scanned the battlefield, her eyes steady, her breath slow and deliberate. The squad had gathered around Captain Haskell, whose wounds were minor but still painful, yet his posture was different now. Gone was the usual arrogance in his stance. Gone was the dismissiveness that had once made him mock her. He stood there, a soldier who understood, perhaps for the first time, the value of every member of his team. "Form up," Haskell called out, his voice hoarse but commanding. "We're not done yet. We need to secure the perimeter and wait for extraction. The men moved to obey, but Amelia could feel the shift in the air. They were no longer looking at her like the rifle cleaner, the housekeeper in uniform. No longer seeing her as a mere soldier who cleaned their equipment. They saw her now as something far more dangerous, far more valuable. They saw her as the woman who had saved them all. As the squad moved to begin their final preparations, Captain Haskell approached her. His face a mixture of disbelief and something deeper. Amelia didn't move. She didn't have to. She had already done what needed to be done. She had proven her worth in a way that no words could ever have expressed. "Hayes," Haskell said, his voice quieter than before. "You did it. You saved us." Amelia didn't look at him, but she could feel the weight of his words settle in her chest. Saved them. That's all she had wanted to do. Not for the praise, not for the glory, but to save them, to show that she was more than what they had assumed. She nodded once, her eyes flicking briefly to his. "I did my job, sir," she replied, her tone calm and steady, as if this had been the plan all along. Haskell's lips twitched in something that might have been the beginnings of a smile, but it faltered before it could fully form. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, tattered notebook, the kind used for field reports and tactical notes. He flipped it open, scribbled something down quickly, and then tore the page free. "Private Amelia Hayes," Haskell began, his voice carrying across the quiet field. "For bravery under fire, exceptional leadership, and for keeping this team alive when all seemed lost." He paused for a moment, the weight of the words hanging in the air. "I'm recommending you for a commendation." Amelia's heart didn't skip a beat. She had expected something like this, but she didn't feel the surge of pride she thought she would. She didn't need a medal. She didn't need a title. She had done what needed to be done. But she also knew that this was something that none of the other soldiers could take from her. She had earned it, through grit, through patience, and through every hour spent silently cleaning and understanding her weapon. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady, but her lips pressed into a tight line. She was grateful, but her focus was already shifting, her thoughts moving forward, to the next task. She could feel the eyes of the rest of the squad on her. Some still unsure, some finally starting to understand the true depth of what she was capable of. But there was no time for that now. "All right, enough standing around," Sergeant Carlton called from the other side of the camp, his voice loud and gruff, though there was no mocking in it this time. "We've still got a job to do before we get the hell out of here. Let's make sure no one else gets any funny ideas." The squad moved quickly, following the orders with a newfound sense of respect for the woman who had led them through hell. For once, no one mocked her. No one dismissed her. No one doubted her. They were all on the same level now, soldiers bound by the same experiences and the same fight. And in that moment, Amelia knew that the respect she had earned wasn't just from her actions in battle. It was from the fact that she had proven herself in the most undeniable way possible. But just as the squad began to move into position, Captain Haskell called her name again. She turned to face him, meeting his gaze. "You're not just the rifle cleaner anymore," he said, his voice quiet, but it carried a weight that made her pause. "You're the one who saved us, and I'll never forget that." Amelia didn't say anything in return. She didn't need to. She simply nodded once, acknowledging the truth in his words. She didn't care about the mockery anymore. She didn't care about proving herself to them. She had already done it. She had already shown them exactly who she was. As the squad moved toward the extraction point, the last of the daylight dimming in the distance, Amelia allowed herself a single moment of reflection. She had spent so long being dismissed, so long being underestimated. But she had never lost sight of who she was. She was more than just a woman who cleaned rifles. She was the woman who saved them all. She glanced up at the sky, the stars just beginning to appear as the last traces of daylight faded. There would be more missions, more battles. She knew that, but for the first time she felt at peace. She had fought, she had led, and she had earned the respect she'd always deserved. And that was enough. The squad had made it through the hell they'd faced, and they would make it out of the rest of this war, not because of one man's leadership or another's bravado, They would make it because of the quiet, steadfast courage of one woman who had never backed down.